The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, tucked behind the hydro bill in a mailbox that hadn't seen anything but flyers and overdue notices in weeks. Nathaniel Briggs stood at the counter of his rental in Hamilton, turning the cream-colored cardstock over in his hands while the kettle ticked behind him. His name was printed in calligraphy so precise it looked machine-made, though he knew better. Everything about her was precise. The return address was a venue out near Niagara on the lake, the kind of place with vineyard views and a wedding planner on retainer. In the next room, his daughter Poppy was narrating a conversation between two stuffed rabbits, her 6-year-old voice climbing into something dramatic and important. She'd inherited that from somewhere, though Nathaniel couldn't say where, since her mother had never been one for drama. Her mother had been precise, too. Precise and gone. He set the invitation down without opening it because he already knew what it was. Camille Forsyth didn't write to him for any other reason anymore. "Daddy?" Poppy appeared in the doorway, one rabbit dangling from her fist. "Is that for me?" "No, Bug. Just grown-up mail." "Boring mail?" "The boringest." She accepted this with the easy trust of a child who didn't yet understand that boring mail could undo a person quietly, over the course of an evening, while he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold, and the invitation propped against the sugar bowl like something that needed watching. He opened it eventually, after Poppy was asleep. "Camille Forsyth and Julian Westbrook request the honor of your presence." Below the printed script in Camille's looping hand. "I know it's strange to ask. I'd still like you there, Nathaniel. For old time's sake, if nothing else." He read the line 3 times, trying to find the version of Camille who meant it kindly and the version who didn't. He'd known her long enough to know both existed in the same person, sometimes in the same sentence. 4 years earlier, Camille had stood in the doorway of their old apartment with a suitcase already packed, telling him that loving him had started to feel like volunteering for a sinking ship. Nathaniel hadn't argued. He'd nodded, the way a man does when he's already lost an argument he never got to have, and let her go with her dignity intact even as his unraveled quietly behind her. What she didn't know, what nobody in that apartment building or his old construction crew or even his own mother had known, was that Nathaniel hadn't simply failed at life after that. He'd disappeared into something else entirely. The years since had moved through him in a way that still felt, some mornings, like they'd happened to a different man. A friend from his old framing crew, a man named Tobias who'd left construction for cybersecurity consulting, had pulled him sideways into close protection work almost by accident. A single job guarding a tech executive through a messy divorce. Then another, then a referral, then a company with his name quietly buried in the ownership structure. By the time Poppy was 3, Nathaniel Briggs ran a private security and risk consultancy with offices in Toronto and Calgary, contracts with firms that didn't put their names on anything, and a level of money that still occasionally embarrassed him, the way wealth does to people who remember exactly what it cost to not have it. He told almost no one, not because he was ashamed of it, but because the version of himself that mattered, the one who packed Poppy's lunches and sat through her recorder recitals wincing politely, had nothing to do with any of it. He looked at the invitation again and thought about Poppy, asleep down the hall, who had been asking lately why she didn't have a mom like other kids at her school. He thought about the fact that Camille still didn't know where Poppy had come from, because the timing of all of it, Camille leaving, the woman who would become Poppy's mother, the brief and complicated year that followed, was not a story Nathaniel had ever told anyone in full and wasn't one he planned to start now. He said yes anyway. For Poppy, who had recently developed an obsession with weddings after watching her cousins, and, if he was honest with the cold tea in front of him, for some small, stubborn part of himself that wanted to see Camille's face when he walked in. 300 kilometers away, in a bridal suite with a view of the escarpment, Camille was laughing at something one of her bridesmaids said, the sound a little too bright, a little too on cue. "You actually think he's coming?" asked Priya, scrolling through the seating chart on her phone. "He's coming," Camille said. "Nathaniel doesn't say yes to things he doesn't mean." "Didn't he end up like broke after you two split?" Camille examined reflection instead of answering directly. "Last I heard, he was doing odd jobs, raising a kid alone." She said it lightly, the way you'd mention weather in another city, but something underneath the lightness had teeth in it. She'd built a life since him, Julian, the engagement ring, the venue with the vineyard, and some part of her had never stopped wanting Nathaniel to see it. To understand finally what he'd let walk out the door. She and Nathaniel had met young, in Kingston, both of them broke and ambitious in different directions. Her finishing a law degree on loans and the kind of relentless drive that made professors remember her name, him working 2 trades jobs to keep them both fed while she studied. He used to leave coffee on her desk before exams with little notes tucked under the cup. He'd sold his late father's guitar once quietly to cover a tuition gap she didn't even know existed until years later. She'd loved him fiercely back then in the uncomplicated way you love someone when you haven't yet decided what you actually want from a life. What she wanted, it turned out, was more than a man who came home smelling like sawdust. She wanted what Julian offered without even trying: effortless, expensive, certain. The night she left, Nathaniel hadn't fought her. He'd just nodded once, like a man stepping back from a ledge he'd already decided not to jump from, and let her go. She told herself for 4 years that his silence back then had been weakness. It was easier than the alternative. The wedding, when it arrived, looked like something built for a magazine spread. White orchids along the aisle, a string quartet warming up near the Lakeview terrace, valets in matching vests parking cars that cost more than Nathaniel's old apartment building. Camille moved through the chaos of the morning in her gown, photographers trailing her, and found her eyes drifting, again and again, without her permission, toward the entrance. "You're really hoping your ex shows up?" Julian asked, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror of the groom's suite. "I think closure is healthy," she said. "Closure," he laughed. "I think you just want him to see all this." She didn't deny it. The seating had already been arranged. Nathaniel and his daughter at table 19, tucked near the kitchen pass-through, beside the caterer's staging table, among guests Julian had deemed socially unnecessary. She'd approved the chart herself. She'd pictured it more than once. Nathaniel in an aging suit, sitting quietly while she danced under string lights beside a man worth considerably more than he'd ever be. She didn't examine too closely why that image gave her satisfaction. It was easier not to. By early evening, the venue had filled with the particular hum of money, investment talk, real estate gossip, somebody's father bragging about a boat. Then, near the gravel drive, conversation began to falter. 3 black SUVs rolled up in formation and stopped in a line so clean it looked rehearsed. "Who on earth is that?" someone near the bar muttered. 2 men stepped from the lead vehicle first, dark suits, discreet earpieces, the unhurried scan of people whose job was to notice everything without looking like they were noticing anything. Not flash, trained. The kind of presence that made even wealthy people go quiet, because real power doesn't usually announce itself with noise. Julian frowned across the terrace. Did somebody invite a politician? Then the back door of the 3rd SUV opened, and Nathaniel Briggs stepped out, holding his daughter's hand. The crowd's murmur dropped into something closer to silence. He wore a dark navy suit with no logos, nothing flashy, and somehow that restraint made him harder to read, not easier. He didn't look like a man trying to prove anything. He looked, if anything, like a man who'd already survived things that made wedding gossip irrelevant. Beside him, Poppy walked in a soft yellow dress, gripping his fingers, her eyes wide at the size of the place. He bent slightly, murmured something only she could hear, and she nodded with the seriousness of a small diplomat. Camille felt her stomach drop. Not from attraction, not exactly, but from the unsettling realization that she could not read him anymore. For years, Nathaniel had been the easiest person in the world to understand. Tonight, he was a closed door. "Daddy," Poppy whispered as they walked toward the entrance. "Why is everyone looking at us?" "Sometimes," Nathaniel said quietly, "people mistake calm for something interesting." A few of Camille's old law school friends spotted him and exchanged amused looks. "No way he actually came," one of them murmured. "Maybe the security guys are his Uber drivers." Someone else joked, low enough to think it was private. Nathaniel heard it. He kept walking, unbothered, and somehow that made the joke shrink instead of land. Camille forced herself forward. "Nathaniel," she said with the practiced warmth of someone used to being watched, "you came." He studied her for a moment before answering. "Congratulations, Camille. No edge in it, no old wound on display. Somehow that was worse than if there had been. And this must be Poppy," he said. "This is Poppy. She's lovely. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me," Nathaniel said simply. And something in Camille's chest twisted, because 4 years ago he'd said almost the same sentence about her. Julian stepped in with his hand extended, his real estate smile already in place. "Julian Westbrook. Heard a lot about you." He noticed, as he shook hands, that Nathaniel's grip carried old calluses, work ruined, not soft, even as the watch on his wrist was worth more than Julian's car. "Quite an entrance," Julian said. "Long drive," Nathaniel answered, and offered nothing more. The venue manager appeared moments later, visibly flustered. "Mr. Briggs, we weren't told you'd be arriving in person. If you'd prefer a private Table 19 is fine," Nathaniel said. The manager blinked. "Are you certain, sir? It's fine?" Julian's eyes flicked to Camille. Neither of them said anything, but the unspoken question, "Who is this man, and why does the staff know his name?" sat in the air between them for the rest of the evening. Dinner brought its own quiet theater. Whispers moved table to table. Someone claimed Nathaniel ran security for federal contractors. Someone else said he consulted for banks after the Rogers outage exposed how exposed everyone actually was. A businessman 2 seats down leaned toward him at one point. "You handled the Calgary thing last year, didn't you? The data breach at." "Some of it," Nathaniel said, sipping water, declining to elaborate. "You don't talk like a guy who's worth what people are saying you're worth." Poppy, coloring quietly on a folded napkin, looked up without missing a beat. "Daddy says people who need everyone to know they're important usually aren't that important." The man laughed, startled. Nathaniel gave her a mild, fond look. "Eat your bun, bug." Camille watched all of it from across the room with a tightening in her chest she didn't want to name. The Nathaniel she remembered had worn his feelings openly. Tired, hopeful, hurt, all of it visible. This version of him was as unreadable in a way that frightened her more than any anger could have. "He's performing," Julian muttered beside her at one point. "Guys like that always are, once they want to prove something." Camille said nothing, because she no longer believed it. Nathaniel didn't look like a man trying to prove anything. He looked like someone trying very hard to stay out of the spotlight despite the room's best efforts to put him in it. Later on the terrace, with the lake wind moving through the string lights, Camille found herself walking toward before she'd consciously decided to. Poppy spotted her first. "Your dress is really pretty." "Thank you. Daddy said you used to steal his hoodies." Camille's chest tightened. Small, ordinary memories surfaced all at once. Sitting on a second-hand couch eating cheap pho because they couldn't afford anything else, falling asleep in his old Carhartt jacket during exam season, laughing over burnt toast at 2 in the morning. They'd had nothing back then, and somehow they'd had more than she had now. "Go grab a cupcake, bug," Nathaniel said gently, and Poppy darted off, already negotiating with herself over how many she could get away with. "She's wonderful," Camille said. "She saved my life," Nathaniel said, without elaborating, and something about the plainness of it unsettled her more than a confession would have. "You're different," she said. "People usually are after 4 years. That's not what I mean." He looked at her properly then, and the calm in his eyes was worse than anger would have been. "You expected me to come in bitter," he said. "Broken, maybe. So you could feel better about how things ended. That's not fair, isn't it?" She had no answer because he wasn't wrong, and they both knew it. "I was never angry that you left," he said, quieter now. "How could you not be? Because I knew exactly what loving me looked like back then." He looked out at the water, showing up tired, showing up broke, showing up anyway. That's not always enough for a person, and it never should have had to be. Camille remembered, suddenly and completely, the autumn she'd been short on tuition, and too proud to say so, and how an envelope with the exact amount had appeared on her desk a week later. Nathaniel claiming overtime pay he never actually had. She'd learned years later by accident that he'd sold his father's guitar to cover it. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked. "Because love isn't supposed to feel like a debt you have to pay back," he said. "I didn't want you carrying that." The wind moved between them, and for a moment the wedding, the guests, all of it, felt very far away. "Why did you actually come tonight?" she asked. "Poppy wanted to see the lake," he said. Then, after a pause, "and maybe some part of me wanted to know you were happy." Before she could answer, Julian appeared with 2 glasses of champagne, his eyes fixed on Nathaniel with a tightness that hadn't been there an hour ago. "Everything all right out here?" "Fine," Camille said too quickly. Julian's polished smile didn't reach his eyes. "I have to say, Briggs, I can't quite figure you out. Most people don't need to. There it is, that whole mysterious man thing." Julian leaned in slightly. "Guys who make real money usually want everyone to know it. You seem almost embarrassed by yours. Money impresses people who feel small," Nathaniel said evenly. "Safety impresses me." He glanced toward Poppy, laughing near the dessert table. "Everything I built for her." Julian's jaw tightened. "And all this security. You really expect me to believe that's necessary?" "Sometimes attention creates danger," Nathaniel said. "What are you exactly?" For the first time that night, something shifted behind Nathaniel's eyes. Not anger, something closer to memory. Someone who learned the hard way what happens when you can't protect the people you love. Camille felt a chill move through her, because suddenly she was remembering the last months before he disappeared from her life. The strange calls he wouldn't explain, the bruise on his jaw he'd shrugged off as a work accident, the nights he barely slept. She'd assumed, back then, that it was money stress. Now, standing here, she wasn't sure anymore. By the final hour of the reception, something had shifted in the room that nobody could quite name. People weren't talking about the wedding anymore. They were talking about Nathaniel Briggs. Near the bar, Julian grabbed one of his investors by the sleeve. "What do you actually know about this guy? Honestly?" "Not much. That's the strange part." The investor pulled out his phone, scrolling to a subscription-only finance article. Briggs Calder Risk Group. Operations across 3 provinces. Government-adjacent contracts nobody talks about by name. Julian's face went pale reading the valuation figure. This can't be the same guy. Apparently it is. The investor glanced toward Nathaniel with something like caution. You don't invite a man like that to your wedding by accident, Julian. Across the room, Camille stood frozen near the dance floor, old memories crashing through her in pieces. Nathaniel walking home soaked because they couldn't afford bus fare. Nathaniel quietly telling her not to worry when collection calls came in. Nathaniel checking over his shoulder near the very end, the way someone does when they're watching for something specific. The terrace doors opened again before she could finish the thought, and this time the room actually stopped. A woman entered flanked by 2 assistants and a small security detail of her own. Silver-haired, unhurried, the kind of presence that made even the wealthiest guests straighten without realizing they'd done it. That's Eleanor Voss, someone near the bar whispered. Why is she here? Eleanor Voss ran one of the most quietly powerful risk advisory firms in the country, the kind of name that made government departments return calls within the hour. Julian had spent 18 months trying and failing to get a meeting with her office about a development permit. Julian straightened his tuxedo and stepped forward, all charm. Mrs. Voss, what an honor, Julian Westbrook. She walked past him as though he hadn't spoken, directly toward Nathaniel. Miss Eleanor, Poppy said happily, abandoning her cupcake. Eleanor's stern face softened instantly. There's my favorite negotiator. She glanced at Nathaniel. We need to talk now. He nodded once. How bad? She handed him a slim folder without answering directly. Nathaniel opened it, scanning in silence, his expression giving nothing away. What's going on? Julian demanded, stepping closer. Eleanor finally looked at him. The board approved the emergency acquisition this afternoon. What acquisition? Westbrook Properties, Eleanor said simply. The color drained from Julian's face. That's not possible. It's not impossible, Nathaniel said quietly, closing the folder. Just badly timed. You're buying my company. I'm deciding whether it's worth saving. The whisper that moved through the crowd had real heat in it now. Camille stared at Nathaniel as though seeing him for the first time. This quiet man she'd once pitied now holding, apparently, the power to dissolve everything Julian had built with a signature. You planned this, Julian snapped. I came because your fiancé invited me, Nathaniel said, voice level. Daddy, Poppy whispered, tugging his sleeve, sensing the air change. People look scared. He crouched slightly. Sometimes the truth makes people uncomfortable. Bug. It's okay. Eleanor's expression shifted. There's more, she said quietly, handing him a second document. This time something crossed Nathaniel's face. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of tired confirmation. What is it? Camille asked before she could stop herself. He looked at Julian. Federal investigators executed warrants in Toronto 2 hours ago. Julian went rigid. That's fraud, Eleanor said calmly. Offshore transfers, falsified development permits across 3 projects. 2 of your senior partners have already accepted immunity deals. The room exploded into murmurs. Julian's face twisted toward fury. You did this. No, Nathaniel said, and for the first time that night, his voice hardened. You did. Camille's heartbeat pounded in her ears as she looked between them, Julian sweating now, no longer composed, and Nathaniel standing exactly as calm as he had all evening, like a man who already understood that storms eventually show people exactly who they are. She noticed something else, too. He didn't look triumphant. He looked disappointed, like some part of him had genuinely hoped the night would go differently. The terrace doors opened a final time. 4 officers in plain federal jackets walked in alongside formally dressed agents. The music died mid-phrase. Cameras lowered. Someone gasped near the bar. The lead agent walked straight to Julian. Julian Westbrook. We have a warrant for your arrest. Fraud, money laundering, falsification of public records. The room dissolved into chaos. Guests pulled out phones. Some backed away from Julian physically. He turned wildly toward Camille. Say something. She couldn't because at that exact moment another realization had landed heavier than the first. Nathaniel had known. Not just tonight, for years. The strange calls, the bruises, the nights he couldn't sleep, all of it suddenly rearranged itself into a different shape entirely. As the agents led Julian away, Nathaniel turned to her, quiet amid the noise. You knew, she said, voice shaking, all those years ago? He was silent for a long moment, then nodded once. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were already being watched, he said. The moment you started your internship at Calder Westbrook Legal, your name got tied to people I didn't trust. Her breath caught. So you left. I disappeared, he said, because staying close to you would have put you in danger. 4 years. 4 years she'd told herself he'd simply failed. Simply wasn't enough, simply broke under the weight of 2 minimum-wage jobs and a relationship he couldn't keep afloat. 4 years resenting a man who had quietly been trying to keep her alive. He didn't look triumphant about any of it. He just looked tired and a little sad, the way people do when a truth arrives too late to be useful. The wedding fell out of headlines within a week, the way scandals do, but the humiliation lingered in a way headlines couldn't capture. Clips of Julian being walked out in handcuffs circulated for days. But the image people kept replaying wasn't his arrest. It was Camille standing motionless in her gown, watching the man she'd once left behind stand perfectly still amid the wreckage of her wedding, his daughter's hand in his. Camille left Niagara before sunrise the next morning and disappeared into a quiet sublet in Halifax owned by an old university friend. No photographers, no curated dinners, no image to maintain, just silence, and inside it, the truth she could no longer avoid. Nathaniel had never betrayed her. He'd vanished to protect her from something she hadn't even known existed. 2 months later, on a gray October afternoon, Camille found herself outside a small recital hall near a lake in Hamilton, working up the courage to go inside. She'd nearly turned back 3 times. Through the window, she spotted Nathaniel in the second row, beside a piano teacher, still and calm, in a way that made the room feel smaller around him. Poppy spotted her first, eyes widening before breaking into a wave. Nathaniel turned slowly. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Hi," Camille said when she finally stepped inside. "Hi, Camille," no edge in his voice. Somehow that made it harder. Poppy ran over. "You came." "I hoped that was all right. Daddy said maybe you would." Poppy grabbed her hand. "I'm playing 2 songs. I practiced for 1,000,000 years." After the recital, Poppy ran off toward the lakeside playground with a friend, and Camille and Nathaniel stood on the patio under a light October drizzle, neither speaking for a long moment. "I'm sorry," Camille finally said. "Not because of how things turned out for you. Not because of Julian. I'm sorry because I stopped seeing who you actually were long before I left. You were young," Nathaniel said. "No," she said. "I was selfish." He didn't argue, and somehow that honesty sat heavier between them than any forgiveness would have. "Why didn't you ever hate me?" she asked. "Because loving someone deeply doesn't just switch off because they hurt you," he said. "For a long time I kept thinking, if things had just been easier back then, maybe it would have gone differently. Did you ever stop loving me?" He was quiet long enough that the answer existed before he said it. "No," he admitted. "But loving someone and going back to them aren't always the same thing." Camille felt the words settle into her like something finally put down after years of carrying it. Poppy came running back, clutching a damp paper drawing. "Daddy, look!" 3 stick figures stood by a lake, all holding hands. "I made this because sad people should still get to be friends." Nathaniel took the drawing carefully and folded it into his coat pocket. "I think it's beautiful, Bug." Camille wiped her face quickly, and Poppy, satisfied, ran off again toward the swings. "Do you think people can forgive each other?" Camille asked quietly, "without getting the old life back?" Nathaniel watched his daughter laughing near the water, rain drifting soft across the lake. "I think forgiveness is just accepting that the love was real," he said, "even when life went somewhere else." Camille nodded, tears slipping down quietly, and for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt like they were standing inside the wreckage of something. They were just 2 people standing by a lake, finally able to let the past be the past.